Now, sitting in for Bob Lee, Steve Bunin.
So, Pat Knight did decline our invitation to come on today's show. Joining us to analyze not only Pat Knight's behavior, but Buzz Williams at Marquette and Anthony Grant at Alabama. We have two radio hosts where these stories are taking over the airwaves. Carl Dukes, the radio host at ESPN 97.5 in Houston, about an hour and a half from Beaumont. Paul Feinbaum of the Paul Feinbaum Radio Network, one of the preeminent media figures in all of the South. And ESPN senior writer and college basketball insider Andy Katz joining us as well, obviously very plugged into the scene on each of these three stories. Carl, let me begin with you because you're in Texas. What do you personally think of Pat Knight's news conference?
I loved it. I love the fact that he was completely honest and candid. He ended up coming on the show on Friday with me and talking about this incident. And the thing about Pat Knight is he said it. It's about accountability. That's what he's looking for out of these seniors. That's what he's looking for out of his team. And the bigger message is just that. How do you hold these college athletes, these student athletes, accountable? When they do things wrong, is it simply about benching them? Is it about going public to the media? And that's what he decided to do. And I'll tell you, a lot of parents called the show. People were chiming in via email, Twitter, saying they wish Pat Knight may have kept this in the locker room. And I completely disagree. I thought this was the right thing to do. He said on my show that he had tried other tactics and other methods. They simply hadn't worked. And this was something that he, as you said, had told his assistant coaches that he was going to do. And I thought it was the right thing to do. And as you said, the team responded. And where they go from here, I'm not sure. But it's amazing to me, Steve, that players can say what they want about coaches. They can tweet, they can Facebook. When a coach comes out and tries to hold his players accountable, people go, oh, my goodness, what is this coach doing? I enjoyed what Pat Knight had to say, and I completely agreed with him.
Paul Feinbaum, what did you think of what Pat Knight had to say?
Well, at first I reacted like, well, he's a chip off the old block until I heard the whole thing in context, Steve. And I would agree with Carl. I think he made a stand, and I think he had to make a stand. And I'm 1,500 miles away, but I like very much what he said. And in this business, you have to take a stand, and you hope to get good results, and he obviously got that Saturday night.
Andy Katz, all your contacts around the country, what are they saying about what Pat Knight said on Wednesday?
A lot of people don't have a problem with it, except for one aspect of it. Was when he threw out drugs.
Yeah.
It was just a little too vague. It begged the question of a follow-up. What does that mean? Have players failed drug tests? Have they been suspended for that? Have they not been suspended for that? I think by throwing that in there, that just raised more questions. The rest of it is fine. I mean, too often we complain when it's the Bill Belichick type news conference and we get nothing out of there. What's the even point of going to it? Because you get no news, you get no personality, you don't get anything. Well, in this instance, you got everything and maybe a little bit too much, and so you need a little bit more follow-up of what does he mean. That was the only thing that I had a problem with when he just sort of threw that out there as if there has been a drug problem or drug issue for 1, 2. He sort of blanketed the whole thing, and that's the one part that I thought needed more explanation.
Carl, how did that play among your listeners in Houston?
I agree with Andy. And, we had people call in. I actually had a mother call in whose son is on the team, and she, said that my son had been suspended for being late to practice. But Andy's right about that aspect of it. I mean, basically what Coach Knight was saying is that these are the things that I've had to deal with. And I don't know if he didn't want to go into it or to what extent it extends in the program. But he mentioned suspensions, arrest. He mentioned drugs. So, I think it was one of many things that he wanted to point out to the public as to these are the things we're trying to clean up here at Lamar.
All right, let's turn our attention now to Marquette's Buzz Williams. He got into hot water after benching 3 of his starters for the Golden Eagles road game Saturday against West Virginia, and then a 4th player, a reserve, for the second half. Now, there was more hot water because this was the scene people saw all over the TV, Buzz Williams dancing to Country Roads, which is what they play in West Virginia after each of the game, win or lose. Well, Williams said he didn't realize that it was like a tradition there. He had to apologize after a near riot.
That was very unprofessional. I apologize. That's not a great representation. It's not a good representation. It's a bad representation of our program and of our institution, so I apologize for that.
Andy Katz, dancing faux pas aside, the bigger issue, I would think, seems to be that he benches 3 starters for the first half, benches the reserve for the second half, and all for violations which Williams won't specify exactly what they are. But how is that playing around the college basketball world?
I do think there's a little mixed reviews. I mean, if you contrast that, and I know you teased it with Anthony Grant, who took even a harsher stance of actually holding guys out, and then they actually, with Tony Mitchell, they're not bringing him back. It does not compare. Now, we do not know exactly what went on. One of the assistants told me it was not a major deal, it was kind of minor, and they wanted to just send a message. And clearly, by them winning the game, he's got the leverage here by what occurred. But I do think, and I think Buzz is doing a great job. I had no problem with the dancing because I think it was just an emotional thing. You could see how much he was sweating. I don't think he did that intentionally. I don't think he was trying to show them up. And I think he's done a phenomenal job. Their team worked harder almost than any other team in the country. But in this instance, I do think it would have been better served if you're going to send a message, you hold them out for a game, not a half.
Paul Feinbaum, how does that compare to what you've seen up close and personal with Anthony Grant in Alabama, which, for the viewers who don't know, benching 4 of his players, second leading scorer Mitchell still out for the entire season, the other 3 are back. How does that compare with what Buzz Williams did in Marquette?
Well, Steve, first of all, I don't want to turn this into American Idol and start singing Almost Heaven, West Virginia, but how could anyone not know West Virginia is the second or third word in that song? As far as how it compares here, completely different. Anthony Grant has been very stoic throughout. He has barely given the media the time of day on what the issues are. He has just simply made a stand with as Andy said, Tony Mitchell and JaMychal Green. Mitchell gone for the season. And the fans here have embraced it. The less they have heard from him, the more they seem to like it. And I think this is a different twist here because a lot of times you do demand explanations. And Tony, and of course, with Anthony Grant, he has simply let the action take place on the court. And he's had tremendous success. So we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and it looked like Alabama's hopes of the NCAA tournament were gone. The media here had written the season off and, quite frankly, had given Anthony credit. Since then, Alabama is on a 3-game winning streak. I mean, dominating wins against Tennessee, against Arkansas on the road, and blowing out Mississippi State, a possible tournament team as well. So I think everyone here really likes what he's doing.
Andy, how does Anthony Grant's tactics, how are those playing in the college basketball world at large?
Well, very well. The one thing we don't know is, how it'll play in recruiting. And unfortunately, people are way too sensitive in the recruiting world with thinking that maybe he doesn't have the players back. That's a selfish view of the world, but it exists, unfortunately, and it exists in the AAU world. But I think from a coaching perspective, and other certainly analysts and talk amongst ourselves, of course, at ESPN, we discuss all these issues on and off camera. Anthony Grant comes out extremely well, especially because of what Paul just mentioned. I mean, they're winning now, and the heat leverage that they've now come back. That first game against LSU, difficult. The guys weren't there. They didn't look as good. It was the first time without the suspended players as a road game. But since that first game, for the most part, they've played better basketball. And the selection committee, I know, is going to look at this and say, you know what, this team was able to sort of persevere these suspensions. They're going to be in the NCAA tournament, and I think they will benefit long-term by his actions. I
want to go around the panel and get your guys' take. Sort of, I guess, one final question. When you compare what Grant, Buzz Williams, Pat Knight, Mick Cronin at Cincinnati, and Chris Mack at Xavier, when you compare what they've all done in this college basketball season, and Carl Dukes, we'll start with you. What are we learning about how coaches handle discipline in 2012?
I think it's changing. I mean, it used to be, you could yell at a kid and pretty much you break his spirits. I think, in this day and age, kids are so aware of what's going on, and there's so many more outlets for these young men. I think coaches are trying to find different avenues to get a response. And, if that means benching you, if that means suspending you for the remainder of the year, or if that means going public to the media and making statements, as Pat Knight did about his senior class, I think you've got to find that balance without crossing the line. And I think that's the toughest thing right now for a lot of college coaches around the country.
Paul, how should coaches find that balance?
Well, I think the real issue, Steve, is when a coach comes in like Pat Knight, you almost want to blow the whole team out, but you can't. In Anthony Grant's case, the problems he's having with the two problems are with Tony Mitchell and with JaMychal Green. They were both recruited by Mark Gottfried, his predecessor. So I think it is a balancing act. You have to try to do the best you can, but at some point I think you have to unload the players.
Andy Katz, what do you think?
I think finally coaches are learning that it's more important to make sure that you've got ethics and character. We're not going to have uniformity here. It's not going to be 100%. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, if you're a coach and you are sticking up for a player who is doing something illegal, unethical, or any kind of thing like that, and you're going to stick your neck out for him, you're going to get burned. You're only going to probably lose games because of that player, and you're probably going to lose your job. So you'd be better served to potentially lose some games in the short term, but save your job by making sure that you're not coddling or enabling any of these kinds of behaviors.
Each of these three schools we're focusing on today in action on Wednesday. Lamar on the road, Alabama at home against Auburn, and Marquette on ESPN2 at Cincinnati. Andy Katz, Paul Feinbaum, Carl Dukes, appreciate your time today on Outside the Lines.